All right, everybody, we are back for another video. This is a video I wanted to make earlier in the week as I was watching the OG Adam Corlick talk about how in Japan, the PlayStation 2 just turned 25 years old. That got me thinking about spending 25 years with this machine, but my two kiddos have been sick all week, so we're still not over all the gunk, but hey, I figured I've been wanting to make this video all week. Let's just go ahead and do it. This is my top 5 PS2 games, and it's kind of a reflection on the console as well. I spent a lot of time with the PS2. I was a diehard, well, not that I really knew what diehard meant as a 6-year-old. To me, that was a Bruce Willis movie, but I loved the N64. I played it to death. I did play the PS1, but it was more of my mom and dad's console, right? Like, we were playing Mario 64, Ocarina of Time, Glover, Kirby, you know, those kind of games, Pokemon Stadium. My parents were playing Resident Evil and Medieval and games like that over on the PS1. And I just loved the Game Boy, all things Pokemon, and the N64. I had a little dabbling in the PS1. I played Ape Escape and Spyro, namely. I was a huge Spyro fan. But the PS2 and the GameCube era came out, and I jumped ship. I have been on record saying I did not play a lot of GameCube games until I got a Wii, because I didn't really play the PS3. But for an era, for a generation, I was a Sony fanboy. The PS2, in my opinion, is still probably one of my top 5 favorite consoles of all time, and what I like about it, I think I heard that there's over 4,000 games for it. I am still exploring new games, new franchises. The long and the short of it is the PS2 is very successful. It has probably every genre imaginable, and not only that, it has amazing games in every single genre. So there are franchises that I haven't got to that are considered classics. Two of the biggest, we'll get these disclaimers out of the way because you're probably thinking they're going to be on the list, but two of the biggest franchises that I did not touch during the lifespan of the PS2, and honestly haven't touched even to this day, is God of War and Metal Gear Solid. I know the God of War trilogy and the Metal Gear Solid 3 probably are considered the best games on the console, but they never really interest me. I was a preteen when this console came out. These kind of games just really didn't appeal to me. You'll see in my list the kind of games I was playing at the time, and I kind of feel like I just missed out on Metal Gear Solid and God of War and haven't really went back to play them. But I've read enough lists, I've watched enough videos to know that those are probably in everybody's top 5. So I just wanted to get those out of the way. I will give them the respect they deserve and say that they just came out in a time in life where, again, I was born in 94. I wasn't really itching to play Metal Gear Solid, if that makes sense. My dad, here's probably the biggest thing. My dad got Metal Gear Solid 2. And I tried playing it a little bit, but again, I was 6, 7 years old when this console came out. I don't know when Metal Gear Solid 2 came out, but I couldn't have been too much older. I just couldn't really get into it as, what, an 8 or 9 year old. So, yeah, I just haven't gone back to Metal Gear Solid. But I just wanted to get those out of the way. Enough rambling. Let's get into my number 5. At number 5 is Grand Theft Auto, specifically probably San Andreas. Now, I know what I just said. I was a kid when these consoles came out, so I didn't even know if I was going to put the Grand Theft Auto games on here because our house had, let's just call it a hate relationship with Grand Theft Auto. I think my dad wanted to play these games, and it got to the point where me and my brother were playing them, so I think he had to just give up on the endeavor. I say that my dad has only thrown away 2 games ever. One was Fable, and one, or maybe 2, were Grand Theft Auto games. I'm not really sure. We owned mostly Vice City and San Andreas, and my brother and I kind of had a deal that I would play Vice City and he would play San Andreas. So if you asked me, I would say Vice City is my favorite of the two because that's the one that I played. But you know, enough time has passed where I can respect everything San Andreas was doing. I mean, San Andreas was just, at the time, it was maybe the most revolutionary game. I know Grand Theft Auto 3 probably is one of the most revolutionary games of all time, and San Andreas really is just perfecting the formula. The cast is insane. The story is pretty good. The characters are iconic. The dating scene is, you know, iconic as well for different reasons. There's like RPG elements where you could give your character different skills. The cheat codes are insane. The epic car chases and shootouts with the cops. So I would say that it wasn't until Grand Theft Auto 4 that I really came into my own for liking and respecting the Grand Theft Auto series. Playing Vice City and San Andreas, it really did just kind of feel edgy to a couple of kids. By the time we hit Grand Theft Auto 4 and 5, I'm able to appreciate the world building and the characters and the decisions. And I mean, GTA 4, when that game came out, legitimately blew my mind. But I understand that Grand Theft Auto becoming a revolutionary industry standard started on the PS2 with Grand Theft Auto 3 and continued through Vice City and San Andreas. So despite it having some notoriety in my household, enough to where we probably didn't play these games as much as we should for them to land on a top 5 list, I gotta give my respect to GTA San Andreas. Coming in at number 4, this is gonna be the only time I try to cheat on this list, and that's because I'm including the entirety of Ratchet and Clank on the PS2. That's on one hand so I can include Ratchet Deadlock, which I loved as a kid. It's another reason is because I play the Ratchet and Clank trilogy on PS3. So when I'm in a Ratchet and Clank mood, I just marathon through those games. So to me, for the majority of my adult life, they've kind of been one game. And you gotta understand, coming off of the PS1 and the N64, Mario 64 and the Spyro trilogy were phenomenal platformers. It was hard to imagine them getting any better. But the whole thing about the 6th generation of gaming is just perfecting genres. And that's what I think Ratchet and Clank did for 3D platforming. It's almost to this day still the pinnacle of 3D platforming. A Hat in Time with its mod support I think is amazing, and Super Mario Odyssey being Super Mario Odyssey are both fantastic. But from the PS2 era up until the Switch, in my opinion, the best 3D platformer was the Ratchet and Clank trilogy. Now, yeah, Super Mario Galaxy is also really good for just platforming bliss, but Ratchet and Clank did a lot of things well. It had upgrades and power-ups that I just don't remember being in 3D platformers at the time. The new guns, the new abilities, it kind of felt like taking aspects of Metroidvanias or Legend of Zelda and putting them in a 3D platformer. The action was top-notch, the writing was great, the comedy was impeccable. The duo, this was my first taste with a duo since I missed out on Banjo-Kazooie on the N64. I just think the Ratchet and Clank series took everything that was great about 3D platformers from the 5th generation and just perfected them. I mean, just knocked it out of the park. So, yes, I will cheat and I will just include every Ratchet and Clank game here at number 4, but I'm penalizing them because I'm including every single game, or else you can make an argument Ratchet and Clank is probably my favorite game. It's just so hard to pick one when thinking about the series as a whole because I play the trilogy so much. So, for all those reasons, I just think Ratchet and Clank is phenomenal, but I'm going to penalize them just a smidge bit because I'm including 4 or 5 games here. Okay, for number 3, I have gone back and forth. A, on the game and the franchise we're picking, and B, where I'm putting it, because when I started this list, it was number 1. But I felt like that was a little disingenuous, so I've moved it all the way to 3, and I think I'm fine with that. It's the Dark Cloud series, but because I said I'm only cheating once, gun to my head, I am going to pick Dark Cloud 2. That's a very tough decision. I grew up on Dark Cloud 1, That was the game we played the most. My dad would just bring home games. And, I mean, another game that's not going to be on this list, but as an example of this is Ico. My dad just brought that game home. We played the crap out of it. My dad loved that game. But, my dad played it more than I did. So that's why it's not on this list. But my dad brought home Dark Cloud. And I guess him and... I don't know if we were talking about it or him and his brother were talking about it, but we said it was like Legend of Zelda. So... I was like, okay, I've got to play this game. And this game built a cult following in my household because we'd heard it was like Legend of Zelda. We play it, we haven't played anything like this. We aren't RPG people. But, I mean, in a way, it's an RPG, right? So, there's dungeon crawling aspects of it, which we had played dungeons from Legend of Zelda, but these were the randomly generated dungeons. No two dungeons are alike. No two playthroughs are alike. There's a city building simulator. There's a party system, which outside of Pokemon, we had never really played a game with a party system. Earthbound a little bit, but it was so different. Like, yes, okay, I get sort of the Zelda elements. It's sword fighting, but everything else about it was so new and so fresh and nothing we had really experienced before. And not too many games since remind me of Dark Cloud, not encapsulating everything about it. 2 came along, and I played it less, but I think it was a lot more grandiose. The photograph invention system, I think, is just amazing. You interact with a lot more NPCs. It's a lot harder. Like, I love Dark Cloud 2, and I'm putting it at number 3. Because I love it, but I'm terrible at it. Like, I have not beat the Dark Cloud games, but I just enjoy my time with them so much. They made me big fans of Level 5. It's just amazing. I would go on as an adult, because I missed out on it as a kid, to play Rogue Galaxy. And I've been enjoying that one. I haven't beat that one either. So, these are 2 games that I haven't beaten, but they're firmly at my number 3, because I still love playing them. I still love going back to them. I remember, I spent an entire Saturday just grinding through Dark Cloud 2. And like an amateur, I didn't save all day. I died, lost all my progress, turned that sucker off, and made a YouTube video about it. And, I mean, they're just phenomenal. I love the Dark Cloud games. They're definitely a different type of RPG, but I'm not an RPG guy, so to me it was fine. It was welcome that this wasn't a paint by the numbers RPG game. So for that, I'll always love the Dark Cloud series. They were so unique, so fresh. They were so good, they made me think I was going to become an RPG guy. But I really don't play any other RPGs outside of Dark Cloud and Pokemon. But, again, I gotta slot them at number 3. Dark Cloud 2 is just a truly unique game. If you know anything close to Dark Cloud 2, let me know. But the whole weapon upgrade path that Dark Cloud 1 has, the city simulator, the interacting with NPCs, the dungeon crawling, the cool party system. If you know any game that's even remotely close to this, please let me know. I love the Dark Cloud games, and I'd love to play something modern with the same vibe. Alright guys, I'm limiting myself to just 2 3D platformers, or else this whole video would be platformers. Vex, Ape Escape, Prince of Persia, Battle for Bikini Bottom, and those are just the ones I've played a lot of. There's a whole lot more. I think the GameCube was peak 3D platformers. Now, for the most part, they're action platformers, more so than what we think of with like Mario 64. But the PS2 just had them, man. They really did. And I'm going with Jak and Daxter. That is my representative here. It may be the best 3D, it may be the best singular 3D action platformer. I know I just praised the Ratchet and Clank franchise, but Jak and Daxter may have the best 3D platformer entry. Oh, and that's without mentioning Ty the Tasmanian Tiger. My gosh, that game also really, really good. And if I had multiple, if I wasn't trying to limit 3D platformers, Ty might be number 3 on my list, or number 5 on my list. That game is great. That game is worthy of being number 5 on my list. But I wanted some diversity. So It's interesting. I could see an argument for really any of the Jak games. Jak 2 would go on to be a complete tonal shift. The PS2 came out at a time when, I mean, Grand Theft Auto 3 just made it where you had to be making something edgy. And Jak and Daxter went from this lovable duo 3D platformer to now I hesitate to call it a Grand Theft Auto knockoff, because they are great games. But to me, when I'm firing up my PS2, what am I wanting to go back and play? It's not Jak 2 or 3, it's Jak and Daxter. Now, maybe if I did commit to replaying Jak 2 and 3, I would love them as much as Jak and Daxter. But when I sit down, my hankerings go to Jak and Daxter. It's just so great. It's really everything I said about Ratchet and Clank, though I will admit, I don't think Jak and Daxter had nearly as many upgrades. You know, the Dark Eco, which I guess it wasn't really Dark Eco in Jak and Daxter, but the different eco types would get into Jak and give him different power-ups, run fast, yada yada yada. I always loved those power-ups, but they aren't nearly as good as Ratchet and Clank. Ratchet and Clank, the level design and the power-ups I do think are better. I always loved the level design in Ratchet and Clank, but just the sandboxy funness of Jak and Daxter, it really just felt like two bros going out, man, on the weekend, having some pizza, crushing the bad guys, you know, just doing hero stuff, man. And yeah, I'm a huge fan of 3D platformers, so it really is limiting myself not to have Ty on here and Prince of Persia on here, because I did love those games as kids. But there's just no denying that if I'm firing up a PS2, Jak and Daxter is always on the menu. So yeah, Jak and Daxter at 2, love it. I could understand any argument for Jak 2 and Jak 3, but for my video, I'm going Jak and Daxter. And you could argue, if I love these 3D platformers so much, why didn't one of them make number 1? You know, I didn't know about this. I didn't know Psychonauts got a PS2 release. Psychonauts is also a really good game. But the reason I can't put those 3D platformers at number 1 is because Resident Evil exists. And boy, Resident Evil 4 was a doozy. My family, like I'm sure most of yours, had a love-hate relationship with the Resident Evil franchise, dating back to the PS1 days. My dad loved the Resident Evil series. See, my brother and I weren't allowed to play, but my dad was. And we were allowed to watch, and my mom hated that. Said it would scare us and give us nightmares. Was she right? I don't know. I'll never tell. Well, my dad continued to play these games. Code Veronica was one of his favorites, but sadly, I never got to watch him play that one. Well, I walked into a movie gallery, saw Resident Evil 4, thought, hey, I remember my dad loved these games, so I rented it. It didn't take long for Leon to get his head completely chopped off for me to run back to the comfort of Jak and Daxter. Sometime later, I would convince myself to play through it and beat it. And I'd probably beat it 100 more times. I loved collecting all the treasures, I loved the cutscenes, the dialogues. The dialogue cutscenes were something out of like Metal Gear Solid, which, you know, being me, it wasn't really something I'd seen before. I loved the merchant, I loved the new guns you got after beating the game. It's probably one of the few games I actually enjoy the boss battles in. I mean, I loved every single part about this game. It's one of the few games I've played so much, I've actually been burnt out of it. Which means that while I'm not necessarily in a hurry to revisit this game in particular, it still holds just such a special place in my heart. Resident Evil 4, at the time when the PS2 was relevant, I was probably ready to say was the best game ever up until that point. You know what I mean? It was just great. I mean, great level design, great writing, great characters, great weapons. We had gone away from the zombies, so we had become more action-oriented, but I don't think it was as cartoonishly action as the new ones. For me, 4 is just a perfect balance. It still was scary. It still was survival horror, but it blended action elements. Like, Leon actually had guns and ammo, and, you know, you could just knife homies down, I feel like better in this one than in the other ones. I don't know. Maybe I'm biased. It also changed the camera angle. It just did a lot, I think, to take... Like, Resident Evil 1, 2, 3, and the ones before 4 are all great, but they're also all relics of their time. I feel like Resident Evil 4 modernized the Resident Evil franchise and created this point where if you're a hardcore Resident Evil fan, you'll probably always love, like, 1 or 2. Those will probably always be your favorite. And maybe the new guys, or new Resident Evil fans, are, like, really into 7 and 8. But 4, to me, was the perfect blend of both of those styles of games. You know, it was like, I played 5. I really liked 5, but I never felt threatened. I never felt like, oh my gosh, what's around the next corner? 4 still had those adrenaline moments. So for me, 4 is just a perfect balance. It's a perfect game. It's just it's phenomenal. I mean, it's been ported. It's giving Skyrim a run for its money with how many things it's been ported to. So I think its legacy speaks for itself. Resident Evil 4 is probably the best game on the PlayStation 2. It's definitely the best game that I've played. Again, I haven't played God of War, Metal Gear Solid, and San Andreas. I was just a little too young to fully appreciate San Andreas. I know those 4 games get tossed around as the best of the best on the PS2. So that's my list on the PS2. The PS2 to me will always hold a special place in my heart. I didn't game a lot with my dad as kids, or as my brother and I were kids. We watched him play, and you know, my dad does not like video games now. You know, he's the type, he'll make fun of us for playing games, even though he had a big hand to play in us getting into games. But my dad loved the PS1. He loved the PS2. My parents would get divorced during the PS2 era, and since then, he really hasn't touched a console. You know, he loved GoldenEye. He loved the Die Hard games. He loved Ico. He loved games like that, and the PS2 was really the last time I saw him play games. I mean, I remember him talking about really wanting to beat Code Veronica. And as a result, nostalgically speaking, the PS2 will always hold a soft spot in my heart. When I went to college in 2013, I took it and my Xbox 360. I didn't even take a Nintendo console. I didn't take a Wii or a GameCube or even my N64. It was all PS2 up until the 360. So to me, it'll always be a great console. And what's so cool about it for a retro console, because I know once we get the PS3, the 360, even the Wii, each of them has a ginormous catalog, but the PS2's catalog for the time was truly insane. So there's so many great consoles, so many great games for each or each genre, that I could play the PS2 for years, maybe even decades, and barely scratch the surface. I watched someone's top 50 PS2 games, and like, I haven't played half, maybe even 30 of the games found within there, which tells me, you know, I still have a lot to uncover when looking at the PS2 library. So I think it's a great console. It's in my top 5. I'd love to hear, what are your favorite games on the PS2? Let me know what I should be playing, and thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.